One second, people. Give me a couple seconds for this one, because I'm doing two phones at a time. And I guess I'm on. Hello, everyone. This is Ilerd. Oh, dang. I was unprepared. I got to put on my favorite beanie. And I just got off from work. Dang. Let me close the blinds so you could see me clearly. Too bright. So anyway, people, so a couple things I want to do something not considered new, but you know me, I'm a gamer, I'm a Lego maker or a collector, and right now I thought I'll do something is reading. I just haven't been, my brain's going blah 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 blah. So I thought I would do something different or do. I mean, I will still do gaming and collect and Lego building and collect, showing off collection. So today, I mean, in the morning, I found something at work in the lobby, and I ran and grabbed it. I found all the Star Wars books. I mean, it's not like a complete set; it's some of it. So I thought in my mind throughout the 8 hours today that thank you for the like. I thought I want to read a Star Wars book. I mean, I'm a big hardcore Star Wars. I mean, I hate to break to you the new movies from The Force Awakens up to the Rise of Skywalker. It was just like, what the heck, Disney? Hi, Billy. And there's a couple things before I start reading. It's about to be February, and I have 1 month left. I will be moving to a different apartment. Hello, whoever. Oh, hi, Tamara. I'm going to be moving. I mean, last week, Friday, I was very overwhelmed and overstressed, and that was causing my lack of sleep. And it was the first time I had to call in. It was just too much. As much it's going to hurt my paycheck, but same time, my mental and my well-being comes first. So anyway, my lease is up on March. Oh, thank you for the love. My lease is up on March, and I'll be moving not very far from my work, but it's going to be a 26-minute walk, worth the try. And pretty much, I'm guessing that the place where my manager showed me, hope it's a bigger studio. I mean, I'll be close with my former manager and my former coworker. They'll keep an eye on me. I mean, I won't be alone. Thank God. Thank goodness. I mean, not God. Anyway, since that got out of the way, which Star Wars book I'll be reading is one of my favorites, and this is going to be this one, Star Wars, The Legacy of the Force. And I thought this is the final chapter. I found out it's not. I guess when I went to, I forgot what's the original the bookstore. It's not Barnes & Noble. It was a bookstore down in Meadowwood, but it was out of business. I guess it was a big fat chapter of the Legacy of the Force collection with the whole volumes in one big book. I checked it's in order, so I got the first one. If I'm thinking about continuing on collecting all the Star Wars books, I will do that. And, oh, hi, brother. You decided to come join me to hear me read, and please do not fall asleep if you're going to be bored out of your mind. Are you serious, bro? This is going to be, you're going to have to sit down and listen. Anyway, I'm going to be starting the reading. It's called Star Wars Legacy of the Force, first volume, Betrayal, by the author Aaron Alston. Oh God, maybe I should keep reading because my reading is going bad. And let's see, I'll read the back. Ah. Honor and duty collide with friendship and blood ties as the Skywalker and Solo clans find themselves on opposing sides of an explosive conflict. When a mission to uncover an illegal missile factory on the planet Audumar ends in a violent ambush, from which Jedi Knight Jason Solo and his protege and cousin Ben Skywalker narrowly escape with their lives. It's the most alarming evidence yet that political unrest is threatening to ignite into total rebellion. And yes, you guys are welcome to Daydream. Grandpa Fett, I'm not Grandpa. Total rebellion, the specter. Please don't interrupt anyway. And say hi to the other viewers. The specter of full-scale war looms between a growing cadre of defiant plans and the Galactic Alliance that some fear is becoming a new empire. Determined to root out those behind the mayhem, Jason follows a trail of cryptic clues to rendezvous with the most shocking of revelations. Meanwhile, Luke grapples with something even more troubling, dream visions of a shadowy figure whose force power and ruthlessness reminds him of Darth Vader. If Luke's vision come to pass, they will bring untold pain to the Jedi Master and the galaxy. And I do have a bookmark, so I decided my bookmark is my Mandalorian sticker. So we're going to start on chapter 1 on the Coruscant version. He doesn't exist with those words spoken without any conscious thought or effort on his part. Luke Skywalker sat upright in bed and looked around at the dimly illuminated chamber. There wasn't much to see. Members of the Jedi Order, even masters such as Luke, didn't accumulate much personal property. Within view were chairs situated in front of unlit computer screens, a wall rack holding plasteel staves and other practice weapons, a table littered with personal effects such as data pads, notes sprawled on scraps of flimsy data chips holding reports from various Jedi Masters, and a crude and not at all accurate sandglass statuette in Luke's image sent to him by a child from Tatooine. Inset into the stone veneer walls were drawers holding his and Mara's limited selection of clothes. Their lightsabers were behind Luke, resting on a shelf on the headboard of their bed. His wife, Mara Jade Skywalker, had more personal items and equipment, of course. Disguises, weapons, communications gears, falsified documents, a former spy. She had never given up the trapping of that trade, but those items weren't here. Luke wasn't sure where she kept them. She didn't bother him with such details. Beside him, she stirred, and he glanced down at her. Her red hair, kept a medium length this season, was an unruly mess. Oh God, I gotta learn how to stop with the period and comma. But there was no sleepiness in her eyes when they opened. In brighter light, he knew those eyes were an amazing green. Who doesn't exist? She asked. I don't know. An enemy. You dream about him? He nodded. I've had the dream a couple of times before. It's not just a dream. It's coming to me through currents in the force. He's all wrapped up in shadows, a dark hooded cloak, but more than that, shadows of light and... Luke shook his head. struggling for the correct word, and ignorance, and denial. And he brings great pain to the galaxy, and to me. Well, if he brings pain to the galaxy, you're obviously going to feel it. No. To me personally, in addition to his other evil, Luke sighed and laid down again. It's too vague, and when I'm awake, when I try to peer into the future to find him, I can't, because he doesn't exist. That's what the dream tells me. Luke hissed in aggravation. Could it be Raynar? Luke considered Raynar Thol, former Jedi Knight, presumed dead during the Yuz Han Vong War, had been discovered a few years earlier, horribly burned during the war, mentally transformed in the years since through his involvement with the insectoid Killik race. That transformation had been a malevolent one, and the Jedi Order had to deal with him. Now he languished in a well-protected cell deep within the Jedi Temple, undergoing treatment for his mental and physical afflictions. Treatment. Treatment meant change, perhaps. In changing, Raynar was becoming something new, and Luke's presentiment pointed towards the being Raynar would someday become. Luke shook Monopoly money somewhere, this guy. Take my shirt off. I'll pause that. Over there. I'm sorry, people on YouTube, if it's stalling because I have my other phone on Facebook for people to read. Shoot, and you guys made me lose my part, you guys. I lose my place. Bro, I'm on YouTube. I could get banned. Anyway, I'm wearing my Boba Fett sweatshirt. Let's see, where did I... there it is. Luke shook his head and pushed the possibility away. In the vision, I don't sense Raynar's alienness, mentally, emotionally. Whoever it is remains human, or near human. There's even the possibility that it's my father, Darth Vader. No, before he was Darth Vader, or just when he was becoming Vader. Luke's... Did I say the right... Oh, okay. Luke's gaze lost his focus as he tried to recapture the dream. What little of his face I can see reminds me of the features of Anakin Skywalker as a Jedi, but his eyes, as I watched, they turned a molten gold or orange, transforming from force use and anger. I have an idea. Tell me. Let's wait until he shows up, then crush him. Luke smiled. All right. He closed his eyes and his breathing slowed. An effort to return to sleep. Within a minute, the rhythm of his breathing became that of natural sleep. But Mara lay awake, her attention on the ceiling, beyond it, through dozens of floor levels of the Jedi enclave to the skies of Coruscant above, and searched for any hint, any flicker of what it was that was causing her husband worry. She found no sign of it, and she, too, slept. Audemars. The gleaming pearl gray turbo-lift door slid open sideways. Oh, dance? Okay. The gleaming pearl gray turbolift doors slid open sideways, and warm air bearing an aroma that advertised death and destruction washed over Jason Solo, his cousin Ben Skywalker, and their guide. Jason took a deep breath and held it. The odors of this subterranean factory were not the smells of corrupted flesh or gangrenous wounds. Smells Jason's was familiar with, but those of labor and industry. The great chamber before them had been a missile manufacturing center for decades, and no amounts of rigorous cleaning would ever be quotable to eliminate the odors of sweat. Machine lubricant, newly fabricated composing materials, solid fuel propellant, and high explosive that filled the air. Come on, bro. I'm in the middle of reading. It's supposed to be story time. I'll do that with other videos next time. Sheesh. Jason expelled the breath and stepped out of the turbo lift, then walked a handful of steps up to the rail overlooking the chamber. He walked rapidly. He walked rapidly so that his Jedi cloak would bellow a little as he strode, so that his boot heels would ring on the metal flooring of this observation catwalk. That was the point, bro. This is story time. Catwalk. Okay, and so his apprentice and guide would be left behind for a moment. This was performance for his guide and all the other representatives of the Damnant Killers Company. Jason knew he was carrying off his role quite well. Dang it outfits my beanie. Quite well. The company officials he'd been dealing with remained properly intimidated, but he didn't know whether to attribute his success to his bearing and manner, his lean, brooding, and handsome looks, or his name. For on this world of Audemars, with its history of fascination with pilots, the name of Jason's father, Han Solo, went a very long way. His guide, a slender, balding man named Teston K. Harren, moved up to the rail to Jason's right, contrasting with the dull grays and blues that were common on this factory walls and its workers' uniforms. Teston was a riot of color. His tunic, with its nearly knee-length hem and its flowing sleeves, was the precise orange of X-wing fighter pilot uniforms, though decorated with purple crisscross lines, breaking it down into a flickering expanse of small diamond shapes, and his trousers, belt, and scarf were a gleaming gold. Teston stroked his lustrous black beard, the gesture a failed attempt to conceal the man's nervousness. Jason felt, rather than saw, Ben move up on the other side of Teston. You can see, Teston said, our workers enjoy very fine conditions. Ben cleared his throat. He says their workers enjoy very fine conditions. Jason nodded absently. He understood Teston's words, and it had taken him little time to learn and understand the Audemars accent. But this was another act, a ploy to keep the Audemars off balance. He leaned forward to give the manufacturing floor below his full attention. The room was large enough to act as a hangar and maintenance bay for 4 full squadrons of X-wing snub fighters. Tall, discreet partitions divided the space into 8 lanes, each of which enclosed an assembly line. Materials entered through small portals in the wall to the left, rolled along on luminous white conveyor belts, and eventually it sighted through portals on the far right. Laborers in gray jumpsuits flanked the belt and worked on the materials as they passed. At the nearest belt, immediately below Jason, the materials being worked on appeared to be compact visual sensor assemblies. The conveyor belt brought in 8 such units and stopped. Moving quickly, the laborers plugged small cable into the units and turned to look into monitors, which showed. Oh, everyone's gone. Okay. Which showed black and white images of jumpsuits, waist, and worker hands. The workers turned the units this way and that, confirming that the sensors were properly calibrated. One monitor never lit up with a view from the sensor. The worker on that unit unplugged it and set it on a table running parallel to the conveyor belt. A moment later, the other workers on this section unplugged their sensor units, and the conveyor belt jerked into motion again, carrying the remaining 7 units to the next station. 1 lane over, the conveyor belt remained in constant motion, carrying sensor unit housing along. The workers on that belt, fewer in number than the sensor testers, reached out occasionally to turn a housing, to look inside, to examine the exterior for cracks or warping. Some workers distributed at intervals along the line, wrapped each housing with a small rubber-headed hammer. Jason assumed they were listening for a musical tone he could not possibly hear at this distance, over the roar of noise from the floor. Another lane away from him, the workers were clad not in jumpsuits but in full coverage hazardous materials suits of a lighter and more reflective gray than the usual worker outfit. Their conveyor belt carried white plates bearing irregular balls the size of a human head but nearly luminous green. The belt stopped as each set of 8 such balls entered the lane, giving the workers time to plunge needle-like sensors into each ball. They, too, checked monitors for a few seconds before withdrawing the needles to allow the balls to continue on. Jason knew that poisonous green. It was the color of the high explosive Audemars manufacturers used to fabricate the concussion missiles they exported. While Jason made his initial survey, Ben kept their guide occupied. "Do you wax your beard?" he asked. "I do not." Let's see how far are we? Yep, 4 more pages. It just seems very shiny. Do you oil it? Tess's voice was a little more irritated in tone. "I do not oil it. I condition it, and I brush it." "Do you brush it with butter?" Jason finally looked to the right, past Tess and at his cousin. Ben was 13, standard years of age, not tall but well-muscled, with a fine-featured freckled face under a mass of flame-red hair. Ben turned, his face impassive, to look at Jason, then said, "The Jedi Knight acknowledged that the factory seems to meet the minimum, the absolute minimum required safety and comfort standards of a galactic alliance military contractor." Damn, itchy. Jason nodded. How far are we? 24 minutes. Jason nodded. The nod meant good improvisation. He was exerting no force skill to communicate words to Ben. Ben's role was to pretend to act as his mentor's translator, when his actual function was to convince the locals that adult Jedi were even more aloof and mysterious than they had thought. No, no, no. Tessin drew a sleeve over his brow, dabbing away a little pers- perspiration. We are well above minimum standards. Those Direcreate barriers, they will vent any explosive farce upward, saving the majority of workers in case of calamity. Worker shifts are only two-fifths the day in length, unlike the old days. Ben repeated Tessin's words, and Jason shrugged. Ben, in, imitated, ben imitated his motions. The gesture caused his own Jedi robe to gape open, revealing the lightsaber hanging from his belt. I gotta scratch my arm, people. Teston glanced at it, then looked back at Jason. Clearly worried, your apprentice, unsure. He looked to Ben again. You are very young, are you not, to be wearing such a weapon? Ben gave him a blank look. It's a practice lightsaber. Ah! Teston nodded as though he understood, and there it was. Perhaps it was just the thought of a 13-year-old with a deadly cutting implement at hand. But Teston's defenses slipped enough that the worry began to bore through. It was like the game in which children are told, for the next hour, do not think about banthas. Try as they might, they would, within minutes or even seconds, think about a bantha. Teston's control finally gave away, and he thought about the banthas, or rather, a place he wasn't supposed to go. Even to think about, Jason could feel Teston try to clamp down on the thought. Something in the increased potency of that worry told Jason that they must be nearer to the source of his concerns than during previous parts of their factory tour. When Teston turned back, Jason looked directly at him and said, "There's something here, something wrong." They were the first words he'd spoken in Teston's presence. Teston shook his head. "No, everything is fine." Jason looked past him, toward the wall to the far right of the chamber. It was gray and regular. A series of metal panels, each the height of a man, and twice as wide, stacked like bricks. He began a slow, deliberate scrutiny, traversing right to left. His gaze swept the walls, the assembly line, the elevated observation chamber directly opposite the turbo lifts by which they had entered, and continued along the wall to the left. As his attention reached the middle of the left wall, along the observation balcony, he felt another pulse of worry from Teston. Ben cleared his throat, a signal. The boy, though nowhere near as sensitive in the force as Jason, had gotten the same feeling. Jason's Jason set off along the balcony in that direction. This time the ringing of his boots, billowing of his cloak, were a side effect of his speed rather than an act. You wish to see the observation chamber? Teston hurried to keep up. His anxiety was growing, and there was something within it, like a shiny stone at the bottom of a murky pond. Jason reached into that pond to draw out the prize within. It was a memory of a door. It was broad and gray. Closing from above as men and women in dark blue jumpsuits. The outfits of supervisors in this facility spread out ahead of its closing. When it settled in place, it was identical to the wall panels Jason saw ahead of him in the here and now. Jason glanced over his shoulder at Teston. Your thoughts betray you. Teston paled. No, there's nothing to betray. Jason rounded the observation balcony corner, took a few more steps, and skidded to a halt in front of one of the wall section. It was here. He knew because he could feel something beyond. Be, conflict. He was. I mean, beyond conflict. He himself was there, fighting. So was Ben. It was a faint glimpse of the future, and he and his apprentice would be in peril beyond. He jerked his head towards the wall. Ben brought out his lightsaber and switched it on. With a snap hiss sound, wow, wow, wow. Its blue blade of coherent energy extended to full length. Ben plunged the blade into the wall panel and began to drag it around in a large circle. Teston, his voice pained, said, he told it was a practice weapon. Jason gave him an innocent look. It's true from a certain point of view. He does practice with it. In his nervousness, Tesson didn't seem to notice that Jason was understanding him clearly now. Ben completed his circle and gave the meter in the half section he outlined a little kit. It fell away into a well-lit chamber. Clanging on the floor beyond, the edges still glowed with the heat the lightsaber had poured into them. Ben stepped through. Jason ducked to follow. He heard Teston muttering, doubtless an alert into a comm link. Jason didn't bother to interfere. They'd just been within clear sight of hundreds of workers in the observation chamber. Dealing with Teston wouldn't keep the alarm from being broadcast. The room beyond Ben's improvised doorway was actually a corridor. 4 meters wide and 8 high, every surface made up of the same dull gray metal rectangle found. My eyes is dropping. Let me take off my beanie. Found in the outer chamber, greenish-white light pouring from the luminous ceiling. To the left, the corridor ended after a few meters, and the end was heavily packed with tall plasteel transport containers. They were marked danger, do not drop, and damn it killer model 16, quantity 24. To the right, the corridor extended another 40 meters and then opened up. The rail and drop-off at the end suggested that it opened onto another observation balcony above another fabrication chamber. Now making the turn from the balcony into the corridor and running towards them were half a dozen troops armed with blaster rifles. Their orange jumpsuits were reminiscent of X-Wing pilot uniforms, but the green carapace armor over their lower legs, torsos, lower arms, and heads was more like stormtrooper speeder bike armor painted the wrong color. And then behind the first 6 troops came another 6, and then another 8. Jason brought his lightsaber out and snapped it into life. The incandescent green of his blade was reflected as highlights against the walls and the armor of the oncoming troops. Stay behind me, he said. Yes, sir. Ben's sigh was audible, and Jason grinned. The foremost trooper, who bore gold bars on his helmet and wrist, shouted, his voice mechanically amplified, "Stop where you are! This section is restricted." Jason moved forward at a walk, rotated his wrist, moving his lightsaber blade around in front of him in patterns vaguely reminiscent of butterfly wings. He shouted back, "Could you speak up? I'm a little deaf." Ben snickered. "Good one. You may not enter this section." They were now 20 meters from the ranks of troopers ahead. Jason continued twirling his lightsaber in a practice form. Fewer people will fewer people will be hurt if you just get out of my way. It was a sort of ritual thing to say. Masked enemy forces almost never backed down, despite the reputation of the Jedi, a reputation that became more widespread, more supernatural. With each year, the Jedi prospered under Luke Skywalker's leadership. The phrase was ritual in another way, too. Once, once upon a time, Jason would have felt tragedy surround him when his actions resulted in the deaths of common soldiers, common guards. But over time, he lost that sense. There was a worrying inevitability to leaders sending their troops to die against more powerful enemies. It had been happening as long as there were violent leaders and obedient followers. In death, these people became one with the Force, and when Jason had accepted that fact, his sense of tragedy had largely evaporated. He took another 2 steps, and the trooper commander called, "Fire!" The troopers began firing. Jason gave himself over to the Force, to his awareness of his surroundings, to his sudden to his suddenness with the men and women trying to kill him. He simply ignored most of the blaster bolts. When he felt them aiming in towards him, he twirled his lightsaber blade in line and battled them away, usually back towards the crowd of troopers. In the first few seconds of their assault, 4 troopers fell to the blast launched by their friends. The smell of burnt flesh began to fill the corridor. Jason felt danger from behind, felt Ben react to it. Jason didn't shift his attention. He continued his march forward. He preferred to be able to protect the inexperienced youth, but the boy was good at blaster defense practice. Hard as it was to trust a Jedi whose skills were just developing, he had to teach, to learn. He had to trust. Jason intercepted the next blaster shot that came his way and batted it toward the trooper commander. It struck the man in the helmet and caromed off, burning out against the ceiling. A portion 4 meters square of the ceiling's illumination winked out, darkening the corridor. The commander fell. The shot was probably not fatal, protected by his helmet. The man would have forehead and skull burns, probably a concussion, but he was unlikely to die. The strategy had its desired effect. The troopers saw their commander fall. They continued firing, but also exchanged looks. Jason never broke pace, and a trooper with silver stripes on his helmet called, "Back! Back!" In a good order, the troopers began a withdrawal. Need to breathe. Behind him, Jason heard more blast fires and the distinct zap of a lightsaber blade intercepting it, deflecting it. Within the flow of the Force, Jason felt a shot coming in towards his back. Felt it being slapped aside, saw and felt it as it hit the wall to his right. The heat from the shot warmed his right shoulder, but the defenders continued their retreat, and soon the last of them was around the corner. Jason's path to the railing was clear. He strode up to it. Over the rail, a dozen meters down, was another assembly line pit, where line after line of munitions components was being assembled. Though at the moment all the lines were stopped, the enormous jumpsuited workers staring up at Jason. Jason's movement out of the corridor brought him within sight of the orange and green defenders who were now arrayed in disciplined rows along the walkway to Jason's left. As soon as he reached the railing, they opened fire again. Their tighter formation allowed them to concentrate the fire, and Jason found himself deflecting more shots than before. He felt rather than saw Ben scoot into position behind him, but no blaster's bolts came at him from that direction. What now? Ben asked. Finish the mission. Jason caught a too close bolt on his blade near the hilt. Unable to aim the deflection, he saw the bolt flash down into the assembly area. It hit a monitor screen. The men and women near the screen dived for a cover. Jason winced or winked. A fraction of a degree of art difference, and that bolt could have hit an explosive package. As inured as he was to causing death, he didn't want to cause it by accident. Oopsie. But you're in charge. I'm busy. Jason took a step forward to give himself more maneuvering and swinging space and concentrated on his attackers. He needed to protect himself and Ben now. Defend a broader area. He focused on battling Bolt. After Bolt back into the ranks of the attackers saw 1, 2, 3 of the soldiers fall, there was a lull and barrage of fire. Jason took a moment to glance over his shoulder. Ben stood at the railing, staring down into the manufacturing line. Into his eye he held a small but expensive holocam unit. The sword carried by wealthy vacationers and holocam hobbyists all over the galaxy. As Jason returned his attention to the soldier, Ben began talking. This is Ben Skywalker. Jedi Knight Jason Solo and I are in secret part of the damned killers plant under the city of Kartan on the planet Aldemar. You're looking at a missile manufacturing line. It's making missiles that are not being reported to the GA. They're selling to planets that aren't supposed to be getting them. Dement is breaking the rules. Oh, and the noise you're hearing? Their guys are trying to kill us. Jason felt Ben's motion as the boys swung to record the blaster versus lightsaber conflict. Is that enough? Ben asked. Jason shook his head. Get the whole chamber, and while you're doing it, figure out what we're supposed to do next. I was kind of thinking we ought to get out of here. With the tip of his lightsaber blade, Jason caught a blast that was crackling towards his right shin. He popped the blast back towards his firer. It hit the woman's blaster rifle, searing it into an unrecognizable lump, causing her green shoulder armor momentarily to catch fire. She retreated, one of her fellow soldiers patting out her flames. Now there were fewer than 15 soldiers standing against the Jedi, and their temporary commander was obviously rethinking his make-a-stand orders. Good. How? Well, the way we came in, no. They'd be waiting for us. Correct. And you never want to fight the enemy on ground. He's chosen if you can avoid it. Jason grinned. Ben's words, so adult, were a quote from Han Solo, a man whose wisdom was often questionable. Except on matters of personal survival, also correct. So, the end of those assembly lines. Good. So go. Jason heard the scrape of a heel as Ben vaulted over the rail. Not waiting, Jason leapt literally, clearing the rail by half a meter, and spun as he fell. Ahead of and below him, Ben was just landing in a crouch on the nearest assembly line, which was loaded with opalescent shell casing. As Jason landed, bent knees and a little upward push from the force, easing the impact. Ben raced forward, reflexively swatting aside the grasping hand of two bold line workers, and crouched as he lunged through the diminutive portal at the end of the line. Jason followed. He heard and felt the heat of blasters bolts hitting an assembly line behind him. He swung his lightsaber back over his shoulder. intercepting one bolt, taking the full force of the impact rather than deflecting the bolt into a neighboring line. No line workers tried to grab him, and in seconds he was squeezing through the portal. And that's the end of chapter 1, everyone. We'll be doing chapter 2, so we'll be checking how many pages I'll be reading. I mean, how far is the pages? Oh, good. It's just 5 long pages. So, if it's boring, I'm sorry, but I thought I'll just do this something every after work and every other weekend. So, I'm gonna put this on the bookmark. And that's the end of this video. I'll see you guys later. And brother, I'll join you for video after reorganize a few things because I got a cabinet now. Okay, guys. See you later.